The Headless Horseman. In the quiet English countryside, where moonlight falls on ancient stone walls and open fields, the night seems peaceful until the wind picks up, and the once still air turns cold. That's when you hear it, hoofbeats thundering in the distance, getting louder and louder. No one dares to go outside to check, though, because everyone knows what that sound means. It's not just any rider, it's the Headless Horseman. The legend of the Headless Horseman has been passed down for centuries in villages like Ravenville, a small town nestled between rolling hills and dense forests. Ravenville is peaceful now, but back in the 17th century, it was the site of tragedy and the birthplace of a haunting. Ravenville wasn't always a quiet place. During England's Civil War, it became a battleground between the Royalists, loyal to King Charles I, and the Parliamentarians, fighting to overthrow him. Caught in the middle was Sir John Barrowclough, a knight who'd earned his reputation as a brave and loyal warrior. Young and fierce, Sir John had won many victories for the king, and his loyalty had earned him a knighthood. But as the war dragged on, things changed. The king's forces started losing ground, and Sir John was sent to defend Ravenville's old stone castle. His mission was to keep it out of enemy hands, no matter the cost. With only a small group of soldiers under his command, Sir John swore he would never let the castle fall. Fate had other plans. The Parliamentarian forces launched a brutal assault on the castle. Sir John and his men fought hard, but they were outnumbered and overwhelmed. As the last line of defense crumbled, Sir John was captured. The enemy didn't show him any mercy. In a gruesome public execution meant to strike fear into the hearts of the Royalists, Sir John was beheaded in the courtyard of the castle he'd sworn to defend. As the executioner raised his axe, witnesses say Sir John uttered a curse. He swore that even in death, he would come back for revenge against those who betrayed him and against anyone who stood in his way. And so, the legend began. Not long after Sir John's execution, strange things started happening in Ravenville. At first, it was just little things, a gust of wind when there should have been none, or the sound of footsteps echoing in empty hallways. But then, the villagers started hearing the hoof beats. It happened mostly at night, the steady, rhythmic pounding of a horse's hooves, galloping through the fields. The sound would start far away and grow louder, as if the rider was getting closer to town. And just when you thought you'd see the rider, the sound would disappear, leaving nothing but an eerie silence and a lingering chill in the air. At first, the villagers thought it was just their imaginations. Maybe the wind was playing tricks on them, or maybe it was a wild animal running through the fields. But those who were brave enough to venture out at night claimed they'd seen him, the figure of a rider, dressed in armor, galloping on a black horse. The thing that terrified them most, though, was what was missing. The rider had no head. One night, a local blacksmith named Harry Greenwood was walking home after a long day at work. It was late, and the moon was hidden behind clouds, casting everything in darkness. As Harry approached the castle ruins, he heard its hoofbeats, louder than he'd ever heard before. Suddenly, out of the mist, a figure on horseback appeared. The rider wore full armor, and his black horse's eyes seemed to glow red in the darkness. Harry froze, his heart racing. The rider was moving fast, heading straight toward him, but something was horribly wrong. Where the rider's head should have been, there was nothing but a cloud of black smoke swirling around his armor. The headless rider raced past Harry, and as the cold wind whipped around him, Harry collapsed to the ground, too scared to move. When Harry finally made it back to town, he told anyone who would listen about what he'd seen. The news spread like wildfire. People began locking their doors at sunset and staying inside until the sun rose. The village fell into a state of fear and superstition, believing that Sir John Barrowclough had returned as the Headless Horseman, seeking revenge. As the weeks passed, more and more people in Ravenville began to connect the ghostly sightings to a dark chapter in the town's past. Rumor had it that some of the townspeople had collaborated with the Parliamentarians during the war, betraying Sir John and ensuring the fall of the castle. These traitors had helped the enemy get into the castle, leading to Sir John's capture and execution. And now, it seemed the ghost of Sir John was out for revenge. The first to disappear was Thomas Hawkins, a local merchant who had secretly provided supplies to the parliamentarians during the war. One night, as he sat at his kitchen table counting his money, the sound of hoofbeats echoed from outside his home. His wife later swore she saw a shadow pass by the window, but when Thomas went to check, he vanished into the night, never to be seen again. A few days later, another man, Robert Dunham, disappeared. Robert had once worked as a servant in the castle and was rumored to have betrayed the royalists by giving the enemy access to the castle's secret tunnels. Like Thomas, Robert disappeared after the sound of hoofbeats rang through the town. His house was left empty, with no sign of a struggle, just a lingering cold that never seemed to leave. One by one, those who were connected to the betrayal vanished. Each disappearance followed the same pattern: the hoofbeats, a sudden chill in the air, and then nothing. The townspeople were terrified. They were convinced that Sir John's vengeful ghost was picking off traitors one by one, and they were powerless to stop him. With no other options, some of the younger men in the village decided to do the unthinkable. They were going to confront the Headless Horseman, or at least try to stop him. They believed that if they could find Sir John's missing head and return it to his grave, they might be able to end the curse. It was said that, after Sir John's execution, his head had been taken by the parliamentarian soldiers and hidden somewhere in the castle's underground vaults. No one had dared to search for it before, but now, desperate to end the hauntings, for brave young villagers James, George, William, and Emily set out to recover the skull. On a cold, windy night, the four of them gathered torches and supplies and made their way to the old castle ruins. The castle was a shadow of its former self, with crumbling walls and overgrown vegetation. Still, the air around it felt heavy, as if the past lingered just beneath the surface. They made their way through the courtyard, past the very spot where Sir John had been executed, and descended into the depths of the castle's underground chambers. The underground vaults were cold and damp, with the smell of decay hanging in the air. Their footsteps echoed off the stone walls as they moved deeper into the darkness. As they explored, they could feel a growing sense of dread, as if something was watching them. Then, just as they reached the deepest chamber, the wind picked up violently, extinguishing their torches. Suddenly, the familiar sound of hoofbeats echoed around them. The Headless Horseman had found them. Panic set in as they scrambled to relight their torches. Just as they did, Emily noticed something unusual. One of the stone tiles on the floor was loose. Working together, they pried it up and discovered a hidden chest. Inside, wrapped in an old cloth, was a human skull. As soon as they lifted the skull out of the chest, the hoofbeats stopped. The air grew still, and the icy chill that had plagued the castle for centuries seemed to vanish. Realizing they had found Sir John's missing head, they carefully carried it back to the courtyard and placed it next to his grave. The moment they returned the skull to its rightful place, something strange happened. The wind died down, and the moon broke through the clouds, casting a gentle light over the ruins of the castle. It was as if Sir John's spirit had finally been put to rest. After that night, the haunting stopped. The Headless Horseman was never seen again, and the hoofbeats that had terrorized the town faded into memory. Ravenville returned to its quiet, peaceful self, but the story of the Headless Horseman became a legend that was passed down for generations. Even today, some say that on dark, stormy nights, if you stand near the old castle ruins, you can still feel the cold wind that once heralded the arrival of the Headless Horseman. But as long as Sir John's head rests in peace, his vengeful spirit no longer roams the countryside. The townspeople learned a hard lesson about betrayal and the price of loyalty, a lesson that echoes in the silence of the old castle where the Headless Knight once rode.